All right, so for the second talk in the session, we're going to have a paper on the latency cost of censorship resistance by Itay Abraham, Yuval Efron, and Ling Ren, and Ling will give the talk.
Thanks, Tim. It's a pleasure to be here to tell you about the latency cost of censorship resistance. And this is joint work with Itay and Yuval. And work actually started last year at A16Z Crypto Research when Yuval was interning there and Itay and I were visiting. And it benefited from a lot of discussion with folks there, including Pranav and Tim. As we have known, blockchains have, since the beginning, struggled with censorship. Roughly speaking, the blockchain works as follows. There are many clients who have transactions they want to put on chain, so they submit the transactions to nodes called validators. And most of the blockchains have a leader-based design, which means there is a special node at any time that's called a block producer, whose job is to take these transactions from clients and assemble a block and put it out to the validators to vote. And this block proposer can then choose to leave out transactions from certain clients, and that's what we refer to as censorship. And censorship, we don't like censorship because it breaks user interface, it creates unfairness, exacerbates the MEV problem, etc. And in this talk, we would like to explore whether there is an inherent cost in terms of efficiency, in terms of number of rounds the consensus protocol needs in order to provide censorship resistance. And in order to do that, we have to first define censorship resistance and latency more rigorously, even though intuitively we kind of know what they mean. And after that, I'll show you a very simple censorship resistant consensus protocol. And it will be clear there that in order to do that, we used one extra round. And the main result of this paper and this talk is that one extra round is necessary and unavoidable. All right, so to define the model more rigorously, we have leader-based consensus. There are n nodes or validators. Up to f of them are malicious. And in this talk, I'm not going to consider incentives and rational behaviors, which is the primary focus of the previous talk. And in a leader-based consensus protocol, these validators take turns to be the leader. And at any time, clients send their transactions to the current leader. The leader takes these transactions and produce a block. And then validators vote on the block in either one round or 2 rounds. And that's not shown on the slide to avoid clutter. And once the validators successfully gather 1 or 2 rounds of votes, that block is confirmed or finalized, and then we move on to the next leader, and the same process repeats. Another block gets proposed, voted, and confirmed, and so on and so forth. And that way, we build a blockchain. Okay. And traditionally, censorship resistance is not a primary metric or a particularly important metric for consensus in the sense that in consensus, one of the primary property we would like to achieve is called liveness. What it means is that each transaction that is submitted is eventually included in the blockchain. But it doesn't have to happen very fast. More concretely, suppose there is a transaction, that yellow one that's awaiting to be included. A leader, if it's malicious, it can choose to ignore that transaction and create a block without it. And then the transaction keeps waiting in the mempool. And the second leader, if it also happens to dislike that transaction, it can once again produce a block without it. And until we have an honest leader who faithfully includes all the transactions he knows about, according to the fees or according to the how old they are. And so a transaction is included in the blockchain only eventually, when the next honest leader shows up. And this can take a while. In particular, F blocks can be created in the middle without including that transaction, right? Because we can have F bad leaders in a row. Okay, so what we want for censorship resistance is that any transaction should be included in the very first block after its submission. Right, and just to clarify, we cannot stop a malicious leader from stalling the progress. Right? A malicious leader can choose to just do nothing, right? Refuse to propose, and then we will have like dead period. Like the malicious leader will waste its leader opportunity, right? And then no block will be produced in that time period, right? And the next leader can do the same. It can choose to not propose a block. Right? However, what this property, what this censorship-resistant definition provides, is that if a leader chooses to generate a block, then it has to include that transaction, right? Or every transaction that has been submitted so far. Okay, and if it still doesn't, then we still have our honest leader that eventually come over and take care of things. Right? And this is, if a consensus protocol satisfies this property, we say it is censorship resistant. Right? And in more plain words, it basically means that a malicious leader can delay the inclusion can delay the confirmation of a transaction, but it cannot censor. Right? It either delays the confirmation of all transactions, or it has to include all of the transactions proposed so far. Right? Okay, of course, I have to clarify a few things. Right? This is assuming that the transaction carries a sufficiently high fee. Right? And as Pranav mentioned, right, if we have more transactions than the blockchain capacity can allow, then even without a censor, there are certain transactions that have to be leave out. Right? In that case, I should amend the definition to mean that any transaction that carries a sufficiently high fee will be included in the first block after its submission. Right? And also, another minor detail, to be precise, it should be included in the first block sometime after its submission, right? Because just imagine that if a transaction is being submitted just a few nanoseconds before the next block is going to be produced, we cannot realistically expect that leader, even if it's an honest leader, to magically know the transaction that just submitted concurrently. Right? So usually we leave a period of time that's proportional to the delay, right, to allow the propagation of that transaction. Right? So again, this is not too important for this talk, right, but if I want to be super precise about the definition, it should be that any transaction that carries a sufficiently high fee and submitted prior to some deadline would be included in the first block after its submission. Okay, so next, the notion of latency. Right? Latency is the amount of time or the number of communication rounds between a transaction submission and its decision or finalization by the consensus protocol. And we have a classic lower bound in the consensus literature that the worst case latency of consensus will have to be order F round, omega F rounds. Right? And this is not too surprising, right? Because each leader can choose to waste some time, and if we have F bad leaders in a row, then they will collectively waste omega F rounds. Right? And that result holds with or without censorship resistance. Right? So it's not what we care about the most. Right? What we care about in this talk, and the more practically relevant metric, is the notion of good case latency. Right? By that, we mean the latency, or number of rounds, the protocol needed to confirm a transaction, assuming that the leader is honest and the network is in a good condition. And you may heard that some protocols, like famous protocols like PBFT, that needs 3 rounds, and they are talking about this notion of good case latency. Okay, and in the last few years, combining classic results and recent results, we also have a good understanding on the good case latency of consensus that allows censorship, right? And the answer is that the good case latency of consensus is either 3 rounds or 4 rounds, right? How did we get that? Right, the first round, the clients have to send their transaction to the leader, and the second round, the leader has to propose that block of transactions, and then or the other validators will engage in either 1 round of voting or 2 rounds of voting to confirm that block, right? So this adds up to either 3 or 4. And we also know in what setting 1 round of voting is sufficient, in what setting it's not. Right? It's not too important to follow this talk, but if you're interested, here is the categorization. Right? In synchrony, we need 1 round of voting. In partial synchrony, the number of rounds of voting depends on what the fault tolerance. Right? If you want to tolerate more than 20%, you need 2 rounds of voting. Right? Otherwise, 1 round suffices. Okay, so this is the result without censorship resistance. And next, let me show you a very simple censorship resistance protocol. And here is it. So basically, we add 1 more round where the validators forward the transactions. Right? Instead of having the clients send the transaction directly to the leader, we ask the clients to send the transaction to the validators, and then the validators will forward them to the leader. Right? And the rest is almost the same as before. The leader proposes, and then the validators engage in 1 or 2 rounds of voting. Right? With the following crucial change. Right? A validator votes only if the block includes the transactions that it forwarded to the leader. Right? In other words, I, as a validator, I am telling the leader, right, these are the transactions I heard about. I am giving it to you, and I want you to include them and propose them. Right? And if the leader doesn't do that, right, does not include the transactions I give it, then I will refuse to vote for the leader, because I detected that leader seems to be performing a censorship attack. Right? And then naturally, only blocks with enough votes can get into the blockchain and be extended upon. Right? So it should be relatively easy to see that the good case latency of this censorship-resistant consensus protocol is 1 extra round than what we saw before. Right? We used to have either 3 or 4 rounds. Now we have either 4 or 5 rounds. Right? And this protocol may be new, but I wouldn't claim too much credit for it, because it is rather natural, and it's heavily inspired by other censorship-resistant protocols in the literature, including the multi-proposer ones. Right? And all of those protocols also incur 1 rounds, right, if they achieve a similar level of censorship resistance. In the next talk, we will see a protocol that weakens the notion of censorship resistance and do better than the protocol I showed you. Right? And I would also briefly remark that it might be a little gray what is the notion of a multi-proposer or single proposer, right? Because in this protocol, it seems that I still have a single proposer, but I managed to achieve censorship resistance. Right? It depends on whether you think about this validator forwarding transactions as an action of proposing or not. Right? So maybe our terminology there needs some more thoughts. Okay, so lastly, I briefly show you the main result that we proved, that it is a lower bound, that this 1 extra round we use is unavoidable. Right? And so the main results of this paper are a pair of lower bounds, impossibility results that says the good case latency of any censorship-resistant consensus protocol will be at least 4 rounds or 5 rounds. In particular, in synchrony, it will be 4 rounds. And in partial synchrony, and if you want to tolerate more than 20% of faults, then it would be 5 rounds. Right? Basically, 1 more round than what was known before. Right? And with that, we will also get the complete characterization of the optimal good case latency of censorship-resistant consensus. It's 4 or 5 rounds, depending on the setting. Right? Once again, 1 more round than what was known before. Okay. I don't think I'll be able to give you all the details, right? But I hope I can at least set up some intuition. Right? To do that, I'll tell you about one of the most fundamental consensus primitives and the simplest, called broadcast. Right? In this setting, we deal with only one decision instead of unlike in blockchain where we have a sequence of decisions. Here we have a leader and n validators up to f of them are malicious. Right? And the liveness property says that eventually everyone decides some value. Right? And the safety property says that all the honest validators should decide the same value. Right? And there's a validity requirement that says if the leader is honest, then the decision should be the leader's input. Right? This is all natural, right? Hopefully. Right. Okay, and in order to capture censorship resistance, we have to bring client into the picture. Right? So now the input originated from the clients, not from the leader. Right? And the liveness and safety are the same as before. The censorship resistance says if the client is honest, then the outcome should be the client's input. Right? Now you may immediately ask, well, now what is the leader doing here? Right? In this problem, I didn't even talk about the role of the leader. Right? And the answer is that the leader is still responsible for speeding up consensus and avoid the worst case. Right? And the good case is still defined to be the leader being honest. Right? In other words, the leader controls the speed of consensus, whereas the client controls the outcome of this consensus protocol. Okay? And also notice that this is an easier problem than our censorship-resistant blockchain, right? Because over there we have many decisions. Here we only have one. Over there we have many clients. Here we only have one. Right? We just want this single client not to be censored. Right? And where in reality we want all of the clients not to not be censored. Right? But when proving a negative result, it's actually preferred that we work with easier problems. Right? Since we can prove that even this easier variant of censorship-resistant consensus incurs run into the lower bounds of 4 or 5 rounds, right? Then naturally the actual problem of censorship-resistant blockchain are subject to the same lower bounds. Right? Next, the problem becomes proving that the censorship-resistant broadcast protocol cannot output in 3 rounds under synchrony or 4 rounds under partial synchrony with more than 20% faults. Right? Even in a good case, right? When the leader is honest and when the network is good. Well, in hindsight, the proof is not that hard, but in the beginning we did struggle quite a bit, right? Because if we wanted to prove a lower bound involving 3 or 4 rounds, it's more challenging because a lot of things can happen in those 3 or 4 rounds, right? It's roughly speaking, gets exponentially harder, right? Because there are many more things that can go wrong in 3 or 4 rounds, right? And the intuition is that we will use this notion. This is a notion existing in the literature that a party is pivotal if its local state determines the outcome of the protocol, right? Assuming no more failures happen. Right? And obviously, initially the client is pivotal, because if the client's output is 0 versus 1, right, that determines whether the consensus outcome should be 0 or 1. Right? And there is established result that if the pivotal party turns out to be faulty, then the protocol cannot conclude yet. It has to run for at least 1 more round, right? Because by definition, the local state of the pivotal party determines whether we should decide on 0 or decide on 1, right? Decide on this outcome or that outcome, right? So we at least have to if the pivotal party tells us its local state, then we can potentially conclude. If it doesn't, then we need to do more to find out which situation we are in. Right. And then we can create this sequence of executions where the client sends no message, a single message, two message, blah, 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 right? And eventually all messages. And there needs to be a flip in terms of the results somewhere, right? So then we can find pivotal party in the second round, right? The difference from in previous work is that we have to make sure that the pivotal party is not the leader, right? If it is the leader, then yes, the protocol needs to run for longer, but that's no longer the good case, right? Because we want to prove the good case latency, right? And turns out we can slightly tweak this sequence of executions, right? So that the client never sends that message to the leader, and still we're able to find this second pivotal party, which is not the leader. And then after some extra steps, we will prove that 3-round is impossible. All right. So that's roughly the idea, the main ideas in this lower bound proof. And I hope you will allow me to spend 1 minute on a brief aside. I skipped many details in this talk, like why sometimes we need 1 round of voting, sometimes 2, and of course I skipped all the proofs details, right? But I want to make sure that I don't give you the impression that these details are advanced, right? They are actually not that complicated if you have some background on how consensus protocols work, right? And in fact, I think consensus should be a relatively easy subject to learn because it does not involve advanced math, it does not involve too much specialized background, right? And yet it seems to be less understood than it should be, partly because there might be, at least I argue, there is a lack of accessible learning materials, and I would like to fill that void. I completed a draft of a textbook on consensus algorithms, specifically written for beginners. So I encourage you to check it out. All right, so I'll conclude the talk here. So we define the censorship resistance and prove that the cost for achieving it is exactly 1 round. And with that.
All right, any questions for Ling? Please come to the microphones. Fine.
All right, thanks. This was a really nice talk. 2 quick questions. One, do you assume infinite block capacity somewhere?
In the paper, yes, but if there's a finite capacity, like I said, we have to assume that only the transactions that carry high fees enjoy censorship resistance, and the protocol should be amended that as a validator, I forward the leader a batch of transactions. If the leader proposes a block that excludes some of the transactions, I need to check that the transactions that are excluded indeed have lower fees than what the leader chooses to include, right? And it can be adapted to handle that case.
Okay. And second question, there is a class of truly leaderless, not multi-proposer protocols that do not need a leader to even make progress. One that comes to mind because I was a causer is Fairledger, but there are others. Those, again, if you're looking at the good case, advance in less than 4 rounds in under partial synchrony, and would it seem to violate this lower bound?
So I would say that the leaderless protocols are definitely censorship resistant, but I'm not even sure what good case means in that setting, right? Because I define the good case to be honest leader, right? Then a leader.
Fault-free and the network.
Oh, yeah. So yes, I define the good case to be honest leader and possibly with faults, right? So those protocols indeed achieve probably better than 4 rounds in the best case where everybody is honest. But if there's even one fault, then it will be subject to the ban.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
You mentioned proof complexity. Do you also see the need for incentives in the round? So say if validators send transactions to a leader, but then later won't sign off on those blocks.
Correct. Yeah, I ignore the incentives in this talk, so that's partly why I managed to come up with a censorship-resistant protocol that's probably simpler than what's out there. But indeed, if you have to consider incentives, then I would encourage you to check out those other protocols, right, where they need the validator to produce some certificates, and the leader needs to include the certificates of the validator instead of having validators refusing to vote.
Thanks.
All right, let's thank Ling again.